everyone, to our Community of Practice call. This one is part of our series on the Tributaries of Holacracy, which is exploring the various influencing models, ideas, and methods on Holacracy, Holacracy's development, all the way from those in the very formative days, all the way through those that are continuing to influence Holacracy at this point. And this call today is focused on the Getting Things Done, or GTD method, originally pioneered by David Allen and now out there spread in the world by the David Allen Company. And I've got Kelly Forrister as my guest today. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi there.
And Kelly is a senior coach at the David Allen Company and has been around David and GTD, I think, just about as long as anyone at this point.
Yep.
And Kelly, maybe if you would, just say a few words about your background and your connection to GTD, just to get us started here.
Sure thing. Yep. I got started with this work about 20 years ago. I met David Allen. I was actually working for a European paper planner company back that had some U.S. base in Massachusetts. Met David Allen and said, oh, I want to be on that side of things, teaching people how to use this tool, not trying to sell the tool. So that's really how I started, and I've been involved in David Allen's work off and on in various formats and companies since then, including a software company that was trying to create some software around GTD and the prior versions of it. And these days I work closely with David on some curriculum development. I teach a lot of classes online primarily and work a lot with our online learning center. So, and I love Holacracy. As you know, I'm a big fan these days of Holacracy and making it work inside our company, because I just think it's just such a great tool for us. And so happy to be on the call today.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the audience's context, for those that aren't aware, the David Allen Company is now practicing Holacracy, and Kelly is one of the key coaches and change agents now for that process inside that organization, helping to make it work for you guys. So this is great. I'm looking forward to diving in, and I think we're going to explore some ground here that might even give me some new insights as well, which is pretty exciting. So I guess to kick us off, my background with GTD, I ran into GTD, must have been a few years into starting my software company, so probably about 8 years ago or so now, when I had my own ad hoc homegrown personal organization system that worked well enough for me for where I was at the time, but I was really hitting its limits and went out looking for a better way to organize myself, and I ran into GTD, read the book and fell in love. It was just, it spoke to me at such a deep level. And this is the fascinating thing for me. I immediately adopted it, and just studied it, adopted it, perfected it, tried helping everyone I knew around me who needed something like this get on board with it. And since then I've been continuing to just watch it, monitor it, deepen my own understanding of it. I think it's taken me many years to fully realize even the full impact or extent to which the ideas in GTD impacted my own development of Holacracy, which is fascinating. Most things I ran into were obvious. It was, oh, I took this from this method, and here it shows up in Holacracy in this way. But GTD is not quite like that. At least it wasn't. Recently it is. I can point in the new Constitution to a whole bunch of different constructs that were directly influenced by GTD. But for most of Holacracy, there was no one thing I could necessarily point to, and yet the more I understood GTD and the deeper I got into it, the deeper it really felt like this had a pretty formative impact on my own thinking. And that's what I'm kind of excited to explore. Maybe you can help me, Kelly, figure out some of the ways in which that is so. And I keep seeing just so many connections between GTD and Holacracy, to the extent that, now when people ask me what are the most, the different methods out there that have had the most impact on Holacracy, I put GTD as, probably one of the top 2 or 3. And it's not which is interesting, because it's not like there's direct connection that's surface visible on the surface, and yet there is such deep connection at the same time. So maybe we can start just by exploring some of the points of connection, and then see from there if we can dig out just how this may have influenced me as an exploration for me too. I have a deep sense that it did, and I can point to some things, but let's see what comes out. So, Kelly, maybe just to kick us off, does that trigger any thoughts for you? Any connections you see?
Well,
what do you see as the similarity?
There are a couple of well, it's terminology, but also in the purpose they serve are very similar things to what comes out of GTD. So in Holacracy, you have coming out of tacticals, what's the action? What are the next action steps? That's huge. I mean, that people don't realize that, but that's one of the best practices that we share about meetings. End all meetings with what are the next actions and who owns them. That's not a standard practice in a lot of companies. So what happens is people leave meetings and then they go back and they sort of have this vague sense. They think something was decided, something was discussed. They might think they have something, but they kind of count on another meeting is going to get booked, and most people won't really know what happened anyway, so another meeting will kind of handle it, or they get confused and say, let's have another meeting to figure out what we talked about in the last meeting. So that practice alone is so tied to GTD, and the concept of what's the next action and who owns it is so powerful. I mean, just really clarifying that. So that one I would.
And let me add a piece to that too, which is just the clarity of definition even of next action, which, I mean, the word action, I think for those not familiar with GTD, sure, that's a word we hear a lot, but I love the clarity that GTD brings to what is a next action, what isn't, what doesn't count as a next action because it's not clear enough or concrete enough, versus, say, the distinction of a project, and that's another. That is a direct, tangible piece out of our tactical meetings. Having clarity now, especially with the new version of the Holacracy Constitution that actually encoded this, although it was kind of in our subjective practice of it for long before, which is just being clear, what is a next action here out of it, and when do you have a project coming out of it? And not allowing things to sneak in that are not really next actions, that are call to actions, which is one of the things I see happening in a lot of meetings. You'll have very vague... go ahead.
Bob will look into that, or Bob, what does look into? So we really encourage when we coach people. I mean, that's really the value of having somebody coach you desk side, because that tendency to take something, an email, and just go, yeah, I got to look into that one, or I got to figure that one out, or I need to decide. That's actually a really common one that causes procrastination for people, is having unclear next action. So they think they're a horrible procrastinator when really they're looking at a list that doesn't really tell them what to do. So then their brain gets scrambled and they go on to, let me go check new email because maybe that's easier. So it becomes this cyclical thing they don't realize, and really getting super clear on a next action and saying, what would we physically, visibly see you doing? What does it mean to decide? Do you need more information to decide? Do you need to talk to someone? Do you need to read an email? Do you need to literally just stare at your belly button and decide? Like, what does decide mean? And so we've gotten super clear on that as well. And it sounds silly in some ways, like, well, we're GTD, we're David Allen Company, we teach this, but it has made our process internally so crisp on that, so that it can't get slippery. And really, for the benefit of the employee, it's not just landing on someone like, okay, they have that, you're going to look into that, or you're going to figure that thing out. It's like, well, what are you going to do? What would we physically, visibly see you doing to make that happen? So that's been great.
Yeah, and it's funny, even in the way you were languaging that, about the what do you need, that's funny, that's the exact language we coach people to use in tactical meetings for facilitating it. When somebody brings up an agenda item, the languaging is, so what do you need? And you keep asking them that. Sometimes 6 or 7 times, you just keep going back to them, so what do you need? So what do you need? And that just evokes the clarity at that level of concrete detail.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it tied that closely, Brian, but even when coaching someone, I'll say, what do you need to do that? And they'll, they pick up some piece of paper. Well, I need to figure this one out. What do you need to do that? Well, I need to talk to Susan. What do you need to do that? Well, I need to book a meeting with her. What do you need to do that? Like, you can literally just keep backing someone up, and that's where people can self-coach. That's what GTD is. You don't need us to be successful with GTD or deciding what things mean to you. You just need to know what the good toolbox of questions are to ask yourself. That's what I think Holacracy does, is like, here's the toolbox. You guys go be successful to really get crisp about what you're committing to as role holders and as an organization of what you want to get done.
Yeah, yeah, and you know that you mentioned the crisp and the clarity. I think that's some of the really deep philosophical resonance, I guess, for lack of a better word, principles that I see and really feel. And I think this is somewhat of how GTD helped shape my own thinking and my own development, just as how I carried about my own knowledge work, which is just the focus on clarity, getting clear. Both in terms of clarity, what is the next action, what are you trying to accomplish, and all those kinds of things, and clear as in clear space, as in getting all of the stuff that's coming in and coming up out of the way to liberate a creativity and an energy and what have you. And that's exactly what Holacracy is doing as well. I mean, both of those are about stuff showing up and getting it into the right space where it matches whatever it means to you. It gets somewhere where it gets processed into clarity, which clears space for something next to show up.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things where there's synergy between the two is what you just described about when stuff shows up. But even Holacracy uses what are your tensions. GTD says what has your attention. But it's really the same thing. What has your attention? What has your attention that you want to bring to the awareness of this group? What do you need from this group that you have your attention on? Meaning, what is pulling you in a way that's disproportionate to what it deserves? So if you think of that analogy with GTD of mind like water, the rock going into the clear pond, the clear lake, the lake doesn't overreact or underreact. It reacts entirely appropriate to what the input is, because it accepts that input. And so if a big rock will have a bigger splash, a small rock will have a smaller splash. And being able to, with Holacracy, treat tensions, wow, okay, this is just a little bigger tension, it's a bigger rock, but there's still a way to handle it. I'm not overreacting or underreacting. I have a process to be able to handle what has my attention, and there's an outlet for everybody in that. Pretty cool.
It's fascinating. I think, yeah, that brings up for me, as I think back to when I was my first few years with GTD, and I think I heard David in one of his talks said, it really takes a couple of years to really fully internalize and understand even what this GTD thing is, and that certainly matched my experience. I read the book and thought I got it, and then I practiced it for a couple of years, and then realized, oh wow! And after 8 years in, I'm still learning. So
yeah, one of our coaches, I was chatting with her yesterday, Meg Edwards, and she's been a coach for a million years, kind of like me, and she described something where when she coaches people on GTD and they want to leap to, well, what list manager should I use? And and just kind of leaping forward, she says, listen, I'm going to go through GTD in 3 phases with you. You need to understand it, number 1. Then you need to create a system. Then you need to look at what the behaviors are that you're going to need to do to make this thing stick. But breaking it out that way is really helpful, because it's really, first you need to understand what it is, and there are going to be layers of it. David says it actually can take 2 hours to get the understanding piece. At least you have a basic understanding of what GTD is. 2 days to get yourself set up. 2 months to really start to get some behaviors down, but 2 years to get to some kind of black belt mastery level with it. And I would say I am still learning. I mean, I think that's why I still do this work after all these years. I still have ahas with it, and I still can have these fascinating conversations with another coach or David and go, oh yeah, that's cool, wow, and my life changes, and so GTD changes. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. I feel that way. 2 of the few things in my life that have had that depth are GTD and Holacracy, where no matter how much I dig in, I feel like it's just hitting at something it's not just a method, it's hitting at something more pure, raw, more true to the essence of reality or something. And it's like, so there's always more depth.
One of the things that's been helpful for me, in one of my podcasts I did with David recently, we were kind of talking about what's the big kind of win with GTD for you, kind of what's the big thing that really keeps you motivated for this. And I apologize, I don't even remember what David shared because I think I was so in my moment of, well, what would I say here? So I'm sorry, I can't share that with you. What David shared, I don't remember, but I know what for me, what was so clear in that moment is it's all about agreements. It's all about what I am agreeing to in this world that I will say I'm going to complete. So every role I take on, every accountability that I energize and fulfill, or not, it's all about what agreement am I making to fulfill that or not. And that's why I love the crispness of Holacracy, is because it's very clear. I have 13 roles in our company. That's a lot of roles, a lot of accountabilities, but I'm crystal clear now, even more than before, even when GTD would call it areas of focus and what are we all have areas, but Holacracy went, no, what are your roles? What are your accountabilities? And I am clearer in it than ever about what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. Because David says you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing.
Know what it is.
Now I actually have a little bit more ability to even
Yeah.
say, hey, I know I have that role and I'm not doing that one accountability because of my resources, but I just want you all to know, hey, if you have attention about it, you can bring it, but I'm very clear about what my agreements are, what I'm saying yes to, so I can really kind of run free inside of me.
Yeah, and I love that focus on agreements too. There's something in that which is, whether you track it or not, capture it or not, the agreement's still there. So it's not an artificial construct. It's the things that your psyche, for whatever reason, your will, yourself has decided, yes, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's got your attention, right? And you can either let that own you, let it distract you because you don't know it has your attention, and it has more of your attention than it probably should because it's not systemized somehow. And I think the same thing is true, and it's funny, that focus and nuance about agreements to yourself is something that I encountered fairly recently, maybe a year or two ago in my exposure to GTD. But I think even before that, there was some intuitive sense of it, and that's very much the path I went down with Holacracy too. It's getting to the natural agreements, not the stuff in your job description, most of which is irrelevant if it's a typical job description, but the stuff that, whether you capture it or not, whether you focus on it or not, it's the stuff that you're really being counted on for, and you're counting on yourself to do. You're owning it. You care about it. It has your attention. It's going to get your attention no matter what, however it's tracked. Then the tracking it is just facilitating a natural flow. It's not trying to artificially pile on new commitments. It's trying to figure out which ones you've already got.
Yeah. We do a process in GTD called the mind sweep, which is really what has your attention. And we're specific about the language. This isn't, please go create a to-do list, write what you have to do. We're very specific about the language. What's grabbing your attention? In fact, the same thing could be done. People could sit down, and my light bulb just went off to sit down and really do that kind of mind sweep related to tensions. And with that, what could I bring as tensions to upcoming meetings that I'm not really clarifying because it didn't come to me in some other way. But in terms of GTD, so we do this mind sweep, and I always ask at the end, how did you feel? Pick a word, grief or relief, writing down what had your attention. And people are usually mixed. It's usually 50-50. And sometimes it's 50-50 within someone's own list. They feel grief or guilt is the other popular 5-letter one, or they feel relief. It depends on what they wrote down. And I said, well, where did that grief and guilt come from? It comes from not keeping the agreement in a way you feel good about. That's where guilt comes from, whether that's you said, I'm going to lose 10 pounds by spring, or I'm going to go to the gym every day, or I'm going to be nicer to my coworkers, or I'm going to finish that budget, or I'm going to do that thing that person asked me in the hallway. It all comes down to some agreement I made, and guilt is like hiding behind a bush going, I'll help you with that. You don't feel good about that? You didn't renegotiate that? You didn't track that anywhere? I can help you with that.
Yeah, and that captures directly my experience going way back before I had a GTD really up and running for me as a practice. Stuff would show up in my world that I cared about, that I had some commitment or agreement to myself that I'd do, and I wouldn't have anywhere to put it, so I'd hold it in my psyche and all that stuff, but there was nowhere, nothing to do with it. And I could feel, and I remember the feeling, even all these years later, of that stress. The stress of noticing something that has caught my attention that I care about and not knowing what to do with it, that I have confidence will result in what needs to happen happening as best it can.
Yep.
And that's what GTD resolved for me on my individual practice. It removed that entirely. Now, anything that showed up after I really got in my practice up and running, anything that showed up in my world that I cared about, that I had some commitment, that had caught my attention, I had somewhere to put it where at least I could trust that, you know what, the best that could possibly happen with this, giving everything else that I want to do in my world, is going to happen. I can trust it and release into it.
Yeah.
And that, I didn't have that feeling in my organization life. I had it in my own personal organization, but I mean my company, in my team setting, right? There were, and so I could force fit it. I could take something and say, well, I'm just going to I'll track this on my waiting list because you know, that way I'll see if somebody else gets to this and I can follow up, or you know, I'll have a discussion with somebody because we need to change the way we're working together here. But there was, I still had that feeling in the company, and I think that same. This is why I said it's taken me, I think, years to realize just how deep the impact of practicing GTD was on my development of Holacracy. The feeling you get with a good GTD system, I think I was searching for that feeling in many ways in my company setting. That feeling of everything that shows up in my awareness has a space to go to the extent I care about it, to make sure it moves where it needs to move. And, you know, we use the word tension in Holacracy, tensions we sense, and it's the exact same focus that you just pointed out. It's what has your attention. It's what tensions do you sense. And, you know, if you're not sensing and feeling a tension about it, you can act on it from theory, but you're likely distracting yourself in the organization. Let's get really back to using and harnessing our consciousness. What has our attention, or what do you feel or sense some tension around in yourself?
Yeah.
And that drives everything else.
I think it's helpful, Brian, when you were saying too, initially you didn't have a system. One of the things that's so helpful for people with GTD is just having some basic buckets of where things go. And there are actually 7 buckets. I mean, literally, you can break it down to 7 buckets. And those 4 of them are actionable, 3 of them are not actionable. So which means every tension that shows up, you could ask the question, is this actionable? Yes or no? There's no maybe, there's no, well, I guess, or there's yes or no. If it is actionable, what's your project or action? If it's not actionable, someday maybe, or as Holacracy will call it, on hold. What are your on? Great, you have a great idea here. Maybe you just want to put it on hold. So giving people some kind of system, it's like encourage your creativity. Some people don't have a system, so it really undermines their own creativity. Like, don't have a good idea, don't have a good idea, there's nowhere to put it. You know, you're not going to have a good place to put it. So, and it starts to train the brain, like, I'm going to squash this good idea because I don't have a good place to put it anyway. But with GTD, it's like, great, create a list called someday maybe, someday soon, someday when I have money, someday when we have resources, someday when we have more role fillers, whatever you want to call it. It's like, at least you have a placeholder for it. And I have personally experienced that where my brain says, oh, it's great. It's safe to have good ideas. And I trust Kelly's going to have good ideas and have a place to actually put them.
Which is the exact same thing I see in the organizational sense or team sense now with Holacracy. Before Holacracy, and when we go into companies, we'll see all the time, it's endemic. You'll have people almost in what you said, don't have a good idea, don't have a good idea. This time it's about the company. It's don't notice the tension about how we work together. Don't, you know, it's like, it's so hard to change the system of what we can expect from each other and how things flow through multiple people and roles. So the feeling is, it becomes a trained apathy. It's like people they don't want to sense that tension because they just have to hold it and it sucks. So they go around trying to tune it out, and you hear the things like, it's just the way it works around here. It turns into a sarcasm and a joking, you know, that's used to like offload the tension some, and I see it, and it just strikes me as tragic. It's like they're trying to suppress one of their most powerful capacities, which is to sense something that could be improved, you know, but because they have nowhere to get that improvement in. And you're right, I never thought about it this way before, but it's the exact same feeling that I saw pre and post GTD in myself and others. That sense of don't have a good idea, you know, don't have a thought of what to do because I have nowhere to hold it to really store it. it's the same thing we see organizationally, and Holacracy, again, just gives a path. It's just a path to process whatever it is, to process and to store or hold the clarity, right? So, and that's what I love about GTD. You have a path to process it and a structure to hold the clarity.
And also who can do something about it, which, I mean, that's been super clear about the roles, very helpful in our company. So if I have attention, instead of, well, I guess that's sort of the executive committee that kind of maybe handles that in a meeting, they'll talk about it, but now it's, oh, the such and such role would be responsible for that and make that decision, and it's so much clearer. It just cuts through that noise of who's going to do something about this. It's like, I know who the role filler is, and if there is nobody defined of who the role filler is, that becomes then a new tension to clarify, hey, I think so and so should be the role to handle this. So it's, I mean, there's so much synergy with GTD and Holacracy. It's, you know, it's really been fantastic.
Yeah, it's I had a sense for a while that one of the things Holacracy most needed, this was in the earlier days of Holacracy, one of the things it most needed was more clarity to tie it into how we show up in a role and what authorities we have, and it took me a while to click it, but the key to that were the distinctions that GTD offers. And in the most recent version of the Holacracy Constitution, version 3 we call it, the two are so much more integrated. Just reading Article 1 of the Constitution now, from anyone familiar with GTD, is going to recognize so many of the constructs there. And it actually grounded Holacracy, I think, to a whole new level in this new version, where now we've defined what authorities do you have directly in terms of what actions can you take and what outcomes can you work towards. And holding an outcome that you're working towards gives you the authority to take actions. Holding an accountability gives you the authority to instantiate outcomes that you want to work towards, to express that. And so, and then what can we expect from each other? You know, we can expect certain levels of clarity from each other. All of that is boiled down to the defined term in the Constitution, next action and project, and those definitions are directly the ones that GTD, or almost word for word anyway, the ones that GTD offers, which grounded everything. And I think in many ways Holacracy is built on top of that framework and clarity that GTD provides. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to practice Holacracy effectively without a good individual organizational practice. And yeah.
Yeah, you at least need a place to capture what you said you're going to do, what your role is, what your projects are, what your actions. It's the core of what a GTD system would be. Where are you tracking what your commitments are you need to get done in the next 12 to 18 months? What are the action steps you need to take to get that done? And what are the roles that you hold? So that's projects, actions, and 20,000-foot areas of focus in GTD. So those all line up really nicely.
Beautifully, yeah. And there's this other piece I think that is really interesting to look at. The Holacracy lens adds, what can I expect from others? So what do I have a reasonable right to ask somebody else to take an action in? And what don't I? And when I want to expect something, because I think it's important for the purpose, you know, what do I do with that? And I love the clarity we have now, and I know what I can ask others to take actions around and expect that they're going to either take them on or at least give it due consideration, and what I can't. It makes all that really clear.
I was doing a webinar recently, and this is pretty common, but it was for a group, it was for a specific client, a webinar on the keys to getting things done. And I asked what their major productivity roadblocks were, and just name a couple. And overwhelmingly for this group, it was delegating, feeling like they can't delegate, but they're feeling overwhelmed themselves. So I said, well, why don't you feel you can delegate? And because, you know, delegation can be a very powerful thing. It's like, if someone else can do this, I certainly want to look at that option. And just to your point with Holacracy, it's like, if I know that someone else in my company holds that role and their accountabilities, it completely objectifies it, and I'm just handing it over to another role filler. And what the participants were expressing to me was, I feel bad. I feel bad asking someone else to do something. They're overwhelmed too. I'm not sure if it's their job. I feel like I should do this. It's faster for me to just do this. And I just kept thinking, like, wow, I'm so grateful that we have the roles to rest on, because if I'm going to say, Wendy, I know Wendy works like a dog. She works really hard, long hours, lots of projects, she's producing a lot, but I'm still going to ask her to do it. It's her role. And it's up to Wendy
Yeah.
to decide how that will be handled. I mean, I may still have my thing of, well, I could do it better, and that could be my ego just, coming in. That's fine, and I could choose to do that, but
Yeah.
I can rest on that. It is objectified. It's like, I'm asking
Yeah.
you as this role because you hold this accountability, so I'd like to be able to delegate this to you. There's none of this, I'm sorry, I know, can you do this? I'm not sure if it's your job. And, I'm not saying don't be sensitive to other people's jobs. If I have more time right now and I can do it, as well as Wendy can. But if I know it's someone's job, that I really think it's helped delegating because it's just an objective thing. Hey, this is your role.
Yeah, that really speaks to me. I've always, my own bias, and I think different people are different, but my own bias was to avoid delegating because it always felt awkward to me to ask somebody else to do something. I had that, before Holacracy, I wasn't sure if it was their job. Even if they worked for me, in the classic hierarchical sense, that doesn't mean that much. They've got lots of things, and, there's things that are reasonable to delegate and not. And that boundary is so blurry in most organizations. So my bias was I didn't feel comfortable personally asking somebody. It felt like a very personal thing. So I would end up holding on to things that probably was limiting the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, that was actually limiting somebody else who might have wanted to really own an area and run with it. But because I'm holding a lot of the stuff in it, it's difficult. And I love the permission Holacracy gives to just because of the objectification and the clarity to say, this falls into that role, and it's not up to me to save them from their tensions. It's up to them if they're overloaded to consciously direct whatever attention they can provide and prioritize in their gut what's most important, or do something to process that tension. They've got plenty of options.
Yeah.
But I love that clarity. And on the other side, I've seen other people that are maybe more inclined to overly delegate and just kind of dump things. And this also gives the clarity of when somebody else can push back and say, not my accountability. I have no expectation to do that. And if that triggers tension, we all have ways to process it.
Yeah, that's been big for us as well. Being able to say no and not feel like it's a confident no. There's a difference. No can come in many flavors. It's a confident no. It's not my role. And one of the small little things why people also don't delegate, it's small but it's big, is they're afraid they won't know how to get it back because they don't have a system. So back to, it helps to be able to do Holacracy if you have a system, a waiting for list or an agenda list, but even just a waiting for list is one of those 7 buckets I described. Having a list, and I look at it like a fishing boat, and you have a lot of fishing lines at the end of your boat, and you're going to reel them in at different times, and depending on how long they've been out there. My waiting for list is really things I've delegated to someone else, an answer, a response, a project, I'm delegating to Amazon to send me the book. I'm delegating to Wendy to get an answer back to me. So I've delegated this thing to someone, and I just want to be able to have it reel it back. It's my longest list, actually, but I feel totally confident in being able to get those back when I need to, or even ping the person to say, how's that going? I handed that off to you on January 2nd. How's that working out? Do you have any update for me? So it's been helpful.
Yeah, it's actually a great example. One of the things I sometimes say, one of the worst ways to build trust is to require it. And what I mean by that is, when I ask somebody else to take an action that I care about, when I track that on my waiting list, I don't just have to hope and trust that they've got it and they're going to handle it and all that. I know that I'm not going to lose it, right? So I can follow up with them. I can ask questions. What that does is set up a system where I don't just have to trust them, because I can trust myself and my own system. And when I can trust my own system, and I don't have to trust them, ironically, it enhances trust in a way I'm not sure I can totally explain, but it seems to have that effect. And same thing with Holacracy, when you add visibility, like our corkboards, or, sorry, I have no idea what that is. That noise in the background. I'm in a rental house at the moment in Florida, and I have no idea what that was. Sorry. So yeah, what I was saying, when you have a corkboard or some kind of team visibility too, I don't just have to hope and trust. Instead, I can see and I can ask and I can trust my own system and my own process. And I think that's really huge in liberating energy and in transforming the interpersonal environment. When I don't just have to, delegate by pushing aggressively and hoping, and saying, yeah, I trust you. Which, if I feel the need to say that, it's probably because at some level I don't. Instead, I can hold it and I can monitor it and I can learn to what extent can I trust whom, how. And I don't have to ask them to be anything other than what they are. I can just get to know that and trust my own system if I care about something, not project it on them.
Hey, Brian, I wonder if it would be helpful to go back to Olivier's, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, question about, I like the idea of agreements. Do you differentiate personal commitments, I care about X, and mutual agreements, I care about X, and I promised others I would deal with it, in the way you process them? I personally don't. I don't. GTD doesn't advocate. There's no difference. It's all stuff when it shows up. It's all attention that has shown up in the form of stuff. There's something for me to decide about, and I'm asking, what is it? And is it actionable? Yes or no? So it doesn't matter if it's personal, professional, no matter what the thing is, it's all being treated the same way. I think what you might be uncovering there, though, is really the question, which I could be intuitively asking at that point, or by the time I get down to doing, I'm asking along the way at some point, okay, what's the value in me getting this done? What's the risk if I don't? So if I have an idea, I want to replant the plants on my side. I'm looking at my side garden over here. I want to replant those plants. Is it actionable? I'm going to be intuitively kind of thinking on this and saying, okay, what's the value in getting this done? What's the risk if I don't? Value is it will look prettier. Risk is no risk. There's no risk in not getting this done. But if in a situation that might involve other people, where somebody said to me, Kelly, yesterday, they said, Kelly, we need another class to offer one of our clients. Can you come up with a class? The value in getting it done is a client is looking for another deliverable from us. The risk if I don't get it done is losing the sale, and other people are counting on me creating a new class for this client. So that if that helps answer that, there's really no difference in terms of how I'm processing it, but the questions might of what's the value versus risk will determine whether this might be actionable, because I might look at that side garden and say, you know what, yeah, sure, it would be pretty, but given time, resources, energy, what I'd rather be doing on my weekends, I'm going to put this on someday maybe. And I have a house list called someday maybe around the house, home improvements or something. So that's how I would handle that, if that helps.
Yeah, I'd add to that. That all really resonates with me too. I don't in my own system differentiate. All that matters is I care about it. There are many reasons I might care about it. But if it's something that I have a commitment to myself to do, perhaps because I've committed it to somebody else, perhaps for other reasons, if it's something that has my attention that I'm going to be thinking about and concerned about if I drop, then it goes on my list. And there's, of course, the constant reassessment of does it stay there over time? If it doesn't get done, there's a process for that. But the one distinction I might add to what you were saying, Kelly, is when we're in a team setting with Holacracy, the one thing I will tune into when it's a project we're talking about, when I've got a project that is something I've chosen to do in my roles, I won't necessarily put that project on our corkboard. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. Right. But if it's a project I've taken on because a teammate cares about it, and I've then taken it on because of that, that by default will go on the corkboard. And it's because if somebody else has asked me to do it, and thus obviously cares about it, I take that as an implicit or a given, rather, that they want visibility around it. So it's just an automatic put it on the corkboard. And that's how I do that. I don't have every project in my system on the corkboard, because some of them nobody cares about hearing an update on. It's really,
Yeah, no,
but the ones that another role does.
Because we've been trying to get clear about that as well in our various meetings and circles I sit in. What is worthy of reporting out as a project? Because my personal projects list, I think, has 30 projects, but I'm only reporting out 3 of them in the program development circle. And it's really more of which are the ones that I want to give an update to this group, that this group might have, they might care about the outcome of this project. So, and that's been helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see, another thought there into Melissa's question here. one of the things that she's Melissa, just for those listening on the audio, she asks, I'm wondering if and how an explicit action to let go or release shows up in both systems, as in we're making the decision to not take the action as a workable way to address the tension. I don't think it's a next action to let go or release a next action. I think it's just delete the next action from your system if you're really letting it go.
The only thing I would add to that is if there's who needs to know that you're letting it go. So
yeah.
I have a project that I've been working on, scoping iPhone as a technical setup guide that I might be writing, and I recently moved that to someday maybe, but so I let go of the project as reporting out, but I had a next action to then communicate to people I thought might care about that I made that decision. So that's where you might have some kind of next action, the results, if you think someone else cares about the decision you just made.
Which is really about a sensing into your own attention or tensions that are coming up. When you think about dropping that action, what do you feel? What shows up in your psyche? If you start feeling a little tension about, wait, I need to tell Tom, then take an action to tell Tom, or whatever.
Yeah.
And actually, that points to, I think, the there's one of the deep principal similarities I see between the two methods too. Again, goes back to that attention or consciousness, and about consciously directing your attention or your consciousness. And I see, for me, that's been one of the greatest gifts of GTD. It helped me clear all of the stuff that I was just wasting psychic space and all that. It helped me consciously direct my attention, my consciousness, choose more consciously. What commitments do I want to make? Because I can see all the commitments in front of me that I'm already holding, and then choose consciously what of the many things I could be focused on this moment do I want to be focused on without fear that I'm missing something.
Yeah.
And I think that's so similar to what Holacracy does for the organization, almost for the organization's attention or consciousness, if you will, which relies on us humans. And this is why I'm feeling more and more the deeper I get into this Holacracy thing, just how critical GTD is as an underpinning practice for those involved. It's about consciously directing the organization's attention. What does the organization put attention on? And right now, most of our organizations are massively wasting their attention. I mean, even when each of us has a good GTD practice, if we're in a typical company, I think that helps a lot. But then you hit the kind of glass ceiling of, but we have no way of clarifying collectively how things work around here, of evolving it. So we spend a lot of attention just kind of spinning, trying to make up for the lack of a clear governance process, the lack of clear roles and expectations. And all of that is a waste of attention, that if we clear that out of the way, we can put more attention on something deeper, which is, why are we here? What are we doing? And in the same way that GTD helps us clear that space so we can focus more on the deeper things to us. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's my path?
Yeah.
What are my big goals or whatever? I think the same thing is true with Holacracy. It clears out so much of the other stuff so we can focus on that deeper level.
Yeah, I love how roles have purposes as well. I mean, that's so helpful to know. Why does this role exist and what is the purpose it's trying to serve? And I mean, with GTD, you have that purpose as one of your horizons of focus. Why are you on the planet? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the end game you're really going for here? I love that Holacracy drills it down even more tactically. I hold this role, and the purpose of this role is to fulfill, to do this, and I have these accountabilities in order to fulfill that. It's just it just makes it workable. It's not theory. It's working concepts. So that's pretty cool.
One of the things that I often say about that is the purpose of a purpose, at least the purpose of attaching a purpose to a role, is actually to generate tension. It tends to filter what catches our attention. So when I have a role and I'm holding its purpose, not just its accountabilities, but I'm holding the general essence of the role, the purpose of the role, it helps me tune into and sense tensions that I otherwise might miss or not pay attention to. And they suddenly show up in my attention because I'm holding this. It's if I'm holding a finance role, what's our finance role's purpose is to be a good steward of the organization's finances, minimize waste and maximize economy, or something like that. So when I hold that essence, that energy, it helps me tune into things and notice things that otherwise might slip under my attention. Or we have our content and outreach circle is its purpose, reveal the natural beauty of Holacracy to the world. And then that helps us break it down into every role. Yeah, which is cool. And when you hold that, you sense more.
Yeah.
And especially when you've got other stuff cleared away, so you're not scared to sense it, like we were talking about earlier. When you're not saying, don't have a good idea, don't have a good idea, or don't sense attention, don't sense attention, you've cleared out the stuff in your way through the process we've got, then the purpose generates more tension. You notice more things. And I think there's an interesting connection. I love the GTD word stuff. And I was talking to a GTD coach, one of your coaches over in London who came to one of our Holacracy trainings. And we were talking about what's stuff versus tension, and it kind of clicked as we were talking. I think if you think of stuff as what shows up, it's that paper on your desk, that email that comes into your inbox or whatever. Tension is the internal experience that you feel when stuff shows up in your attention. Right? So it's like, that email comes in, that's the stuff hitting you, and then your internal feeling is a sense of, ooh, tension, there's something I got to do. So I think we're pointing to just two sides. One is the external versus the internal
that's a cool
side of the same thing.
Yeah, because stuff is defined as life's random inputs. So it would be the email, and okay, do I have attention now about this email or phone call or whatever it might be? Yeah, cool.
Which, of course, you only do if it catches your attention. When emails show up, my cat really doesn't care. He doesn't filter that level of reality, right? But same thing, so you can only pay attention and feel tension about the stuff that is somehow meaningful to you. And I think what holding a purpose does is make more stuff meaningful to you, so you will feel tension around it.
One other thing too, Brian, I think that there's really, kind of a lot of what we've talked about, but one other concept that's really nice synergy between Holacracy and GTD is the idea of closing loops. So when you have you sense a tension, you're really looking to close the loop on this tension you have. So if you picture a loop, a lot of people, the loop kind of goes here and then it trails off. It doesn't really get closure. It's sort of that stays as a gnawing sense of anxiety inside us. Or people think, oh, well, the only way I can close this loop is to do it. So the only way I feel bad about all my stuff because I have to do it. I actually think you can get huge value just by deciding what you're going to do about it. And I wish more people knew that, because I think they'd run a little freer in this world if they knew, nope, you can actually get a lot of freedom by just deciding what you're going to do about it, by bringing the tension forward and feeling like a decision has been made about what to do with this tension, how can this be handled. And a whole lot of people, I think, would free themselves up. It's like, we're never going to get our to-do list down to 0. I mean, that really won't exist until the day we die, and then all of our to-do lists are wiped out. So, but until then, it might as well feel good about stuff. My lists are really just a bunch of decisions I've made, and I'm doing my best to get to them. But I'm never going to get to all of them. It's in understanding. It's like, I'm just trying to close loops here. What would close this loop so that I can then move on to the next item?
Yeah, I love it, and I feel that with GTD, it's is one of the powerful habits to get into, or reinforcers rather of the habit. Once you realize that as soon as you decide on it and you get clear with yourself and you put it on a list in a trusted system, it dissolves. I mean, even it's not done, but the tension's gone. And I see the same thing in Holacracy, which is fascinating. It's people show up and bring attention to a governance meeting. And just by processing it into, here's how we're going to work differently together. The system hasn't actually changed. I mean, you've restructured what will happen, but you haven't actually resolved or changed your reality much at all. You've just restructured it. And yet the tension dissolves. The feeling is, it's gone somewhere that I trust will in time lead to the results that are needed here. It's not going to get dropped and swept under the rug or missed or whatever anymore. Or even, the thing is, some actions that I put on my list, I never do. And eventually I cross them off. And yet I do that with such a great sense of release, because I know that if it was on that list and I was doing my practice, it got every opportunity, and the only reason it didn't get done is because it never bubbled up to be the most important thing to direct my attention towards. And so when I delete it with confidence, knowing that that's the best thing that could have happened in my reality with my capacities and priorities and everything else.
Yeah.
And I find the same thing. Sometimes you change something and it doesn't actually result in anything. Often it does, but sometimes it doesn't. When you process something in governance, and yet at least you know that it's getting every due opportunity to get attention of the organization, and it will be prioritized consciously and clearly against everything else we've got going on. And then if it doesn't happen, it's a different story. It's not because somebody dropped it because we failed to put attention towards it, right? It's because we consciously dropped it, knowing that there was other stuff to put our attention towards, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I'm wondering, just as we move into our last few minutes here, anything else that we haven't covered, Kelly, that jumps out at you as interesting connections, or anything that you might hypothesize just from our conversation about how GTD and my own practice of GTD has influenced what you see in Holacracy?
I think there's really nice connection between roles in Holacracy and GTD Horizons of Focus, the 20,000-foot areas of focus and responsibility. Because long before I knew Holacracy and teaching GTD classes, when people would say, oh, I'm so, they just felt completely verklempt about their lists and priorities and not knowing what to choose. And I would say, you need to climb up. If you want perspective, go up the horizons of focus. Don't try to drill down to next actions. You want to climb up. So I'd say, what are your roles? What are your responsibilities? Really referring to exactly what Holacracy would say, well, is that your role? Are those your accountabilities? Because so many people get confused about their priorities, really because they're confused about their job. They don't know what they should be spending time on. And I'm not saying there's not kind of that, ooh, should I work on this or this? Again, like, what's the value in doing this? What's the risk if I don't? But being super crystal clear about your roles can make such an impact. And GTD will recommend that you review your roles quarterly to make sure, do I have appropriate projects captured around this? Are these the roles I still want to be working on? Are these still relevant? Are these accountabilities updated? I think that can be a really powerful process just to make sure, and I'm about to do that as well, just go through all my different roles and say, do these accountabilities really match? Is this really the best name for this role? Is this, just really get clear. Do I have any projects that I'm ignoring here that belong on my projects list related to any of my roles, and getting clear about that?
Yeah, that really resonates. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It's yeah, I still continue to find new connections between these. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you wanted to add before we close out here?
Nope, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions about GTD if anybody wants to email me. I guess that would be the only thing. I'm more than happy to answer GTD questions at kelly@davidco.com, davidco.com. People are more than welcome to write to me personally, and I love answering GTD questions. So anything I can do around that, I'm more than happy.
And let me use the opportunity too to plug your both your Connect platform, which is kind of equivalent to our Community of Practice program here. For those looking to really embody GTD, there's a ton of resources on there. I think we've done a couple of talks now in various ways that are recorded on there, and there's a whole ton of others. And of course, David Coe's trainings. I had the opportunity to attend one myself recently, and it was awesome. You guys do just a stellar job of trainings. I was taking copious notes for our own training business. It's very cool.
Yeah, and I do also, a couple times a month, I do a class called Keys to Getting Things Done, which is a 1-hour webinar, 90-minute webinar that really covers all the fundamentals of GTD, and that's a really helpful one if you're still trying to get your arms around GTD and the book hasn't quite done it for you, or just you've been hearing it in bits and pieces. I love that webinar because I've designed it really just for whether you know what GTD or you have no idea what GTD is. It's like it gives you the whole broad spectrum of the best practices and kind of what are the 7 buckets and what are the 2 key questions and just the key practices to know. So I'd recommend those as well. Those are on our website.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's great. Well, I have a hunch we could probably take a whole nother hour exploring connections, and we'd find plenty more. But let's call it a wrap there. Again, I can count on one hand, probably on three fingers, the number of methods I've run into in my life that have had a just really deep, liberating, profound impact, and GTD is absolutely one of them. I think it's much more deeply related to holacracy than I think most people even realize at first glance, on just many levels, and really can't recommend taking the time and attention to explore it further enough if you haven't already. And if you have already, well, keep going. It's a many year journey, and it just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah,
so very cool.
I'd agree on the flip side around holacracy. It's more than meets the eye, and it has made a profound impact in how I do my work and see things. So thank you for having me on this. I could also talk for hours, so thanks so much. It was a great pleasure to share this, and thanks for inviting me.
Likewise. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Bye,
and thanks
everybody.
everyone who joined us.